"Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them." The command cracked across the parking lot before Danielle Brooks even had time to close the door of her black SUV. She froze beside the driver's seat, one hand still wrapped around a paper coffee cup, the other hanging open at her side. Across 20 feet of rain-dark pavement, Officer Ryan Keller stood behind his cruiser with both hands locked around his service weapon, his voice carrying hard enough to turn heads inside the convenience store. Danielle didn't look at the gun. Not at first. Her eyes moved past Keller, past the flashing red and blue lights washing the storefront windows, toward a man in a gray jacket standing across the street beneath the awning of a closed pharmacy. He was watching. That was the problem. "Put the cup down," Keller ordered. Danielle lowered it slowly onto the roof of the SUV. "Officer, you need to lower your voice." Keller's expression tightened. Wrong sentence. She knew at the instant she said it. To him, calm sounded like defiance. Control sounded like attitude. He stepped out from behind the cruiser. "I'm not asking again." "Hands up." Danielle raised both hands shoulder high. Rain gathered along the sleeves of her dark coat and slipped cold against her wrists. A second officer, Travis Monroe, moved around the passenger side of the patrol car, watching her carefully. His eyes flicked toward the SUV, then back to Danielle. She could almost see the questions forming in his face, but he didn't speak. Danielle checked the pharmacy again without turning her head. The man in gray was still there, but now he had taken out his phone. He wasn't supposed to notice her. He definitely wasn't supposed to see local police surrounding her. "What's your name?" Keller demanded. "Danielle Brooks." "What are you doing here?" She hesitated for half a second. Half a second was too long. Keller noticed. "I asked you a question." Danielle kept her voice even. "I can explain, but not like this." "Not like what?" "Not in the middle of the street." Keller gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "You don't get to set the rules right now." Danielle's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. 3 years of training had taught her that silence could keep a bad situation from becoming worse. It had also taught her something harder: sometimes the person with the least power in a moment had to be the most disciplined person in it. A gust of wind pushed rain beneath the awning across the street. The man in gray stepped backward. Danielle felt her stomach drop. He was leaving. "Officer Keller," she said, reading the nameplate on his uniform, "there is information you need to verify before you continue." His eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" "It's on your chest." For the first time, Monroe looked away, almost embarrassed. Keller did not. "Do you have identification?" "Yes." "Where?" "Inside my left jacket pocket." Keller raised his voice. "Do not reach for it." Danielle held perfectly still. "I wasn't going to." Across the street, the man in gray slipped his phone into his pocket and started walking toward a dark sedan parked half a block away. Danielle watched him through the reflection in the SUV window. Every second mattered now. Every movement had a cost. She could end the misunderstanding almost immediately. One badge. One credential wallet. One sentence spoken loudly enough. But if the men across the street heard who she was, 6 months of careful work could collapse before the next traffic light changed. Keller took another step toward her. "Turn around." Danielle slowly faced the SUV. Red and blue light moved across the wet glass in alternating waves. Her reflection stared back at her, calm on the outside, calculating underneath. Behind her, she heard Keller say, "Hands on the vehicle." She obeyed. Then, in the reflection, she saw the gray-jacketed man reach the sedan. And for the first time since the cruisers arrived, Danielle knew the danger wasn't coming from the officers behind her. It was driving away. Danielle kept both palms flat against the rain-cooled metal of the SUV while the dark sedan eased away from the curb across the street. For 1 second, she considered saying it. "Federal agent. Active investigation. Call your supervisor." 3 phrases could change everything. They could also tell the men in the gray jacket exactly who had been watching him for 6 months. She heard tires whisper over wet pavement as the sedan turned at the corner and disappeared behind a row of brick storefronts. Her chest tightened, but her voice stayed level. Officer Keller, I need you to contact your supervisor. Keller stood several feet behind her. You need to answer my questions. I will answer them through the appropriate channel. That is not how this works. Danielle looked at her own reflection in the window, distorted by rain and alternating red and blue light. She had spent years learning how to walk into rooms where people lied for a living and notice the one detail that did not belong. Tonight, the detail that did not belong was her own silence. She had credentials 6 inches from her hand and could not safely reach them. She had authority she could not safely announce. And somewhere beyond the intersection, a man named Victor Hawthorne was probably wondering why 2 patrol cars had suddenly surrounded the woman he had seen outside the same convenience store 3 nights in a row. Monroe stepped closer to the SUV, his tone less sharp than Keller's. Ma'am, is there a reason you do not want to tell us what you are doing here? Danielle turned her head only enough for him to hear her clearly. Yes. What reason? One I cannot discuss in public. Keller exhaled through his nose. Convenient. Danielle said nothing. The word landed harder than he probably intended. She had heard versions of it before. Convenient. Suspicious. Uncooperative. Words that sounded neutral until they were used to fill in facts nobody had bothered to check. Keller moved toward the driver's door and looked through the window. Whose vehicle is this? It is assigned to me. Assigned by who? Danielle paused. My employer. Keller glanced at Monroe as if the answer proved something. Monroe did not return the look. Instead, he studied Danielle more carefully. Her posture. Her controlled breathing. The way she had not once tried to argue her way out of the situation. What kind of work do you do? He asked. Work that requires discretion. Keller gave another humorless laugh. You keep saying things like that and expect us not to. Be suspicious. Danielle finally looked back at him. Suspicion is a reason to verify. It is not a reason to stop verifying. For the first time, Keller had no immediate answer. Rain ticked against the cruiser hood. A truck passed at the far end of the block, spraying water from its tires. Danielle could still see the empty space where Hawthorne's sedan had been. 6 months of surveillance had taught her his habits. He never left early unless something felt wrong. Now something felt wrong. Keller reached toward his radio. Dispatch, run the vehicle identification number. Danielle's eyes narrowed slightly. Finally. The radio hissed. A dispatcher began reading back information, then stopped mid-sentence. Static filled the pause. Keller frowned. Repeat that. The answer came quieter this time. Officer, the vehicle record is restricted. Federal access only. Monroe looked at Danielle. Keller looked at the SUV. And Danielle knew they had just reached the last easy exit from this mistake. The dispatcher repeated the warning, and this time every word seemed to hang in the rain. Restricted vehicle record. Federal access required. Monroe shifted his weight. Keller did not. He stared at the SUV as if the database had challenged him personally. That does not prove anything, he said. Danielle watched him through the reflection in the glass. There it was. The moment when new information should have changed the direction of the encounter. Instead, Keller bent the information until it fit the conclusion he had already chosen. Officer, Danielle said, you now have a clear reason to contact a supervisor. Keller's jaw tightened. I have a clear reason to keep asking questions. Monroe glanced toward him. Ryan, maybe we should slow this down. Keller turned just enough to give him a look. We got a call about a suspicious person, a restricted vehicle, and someone refusing to identify her employer. That is not a reason to slow down. Danielle felt the cold rain slipping down the back of her collar. She did not move. Her mind was somewhere else now, counting possibilities. Hawthorne would already be 2 or 3 blocks away. If he had seen enough, he would change cars. If he changed cars, the team positioned farther east might lose him. If the team lost him tonight, the scheduled meeting with his supplier could disappear with him. Keller continued speaking, but Danielle heard only fragments. Suspicious. Procedure. Safety. She had heard the language before in training rooms, court testimony, after-action reviews. Words meant to create order. Words that became dangerous when someone used them as substitutes for judgment. Monroe walked toward the rear of the SUV and looked at the temporary parking permit inside the window. "This is registered to a federal fleet contractor," he said quietly. Keller looked over. So maybe she is telling us exactly enough to keep something confidential." Keller shook his head. "Or maybe she knows what she is doing and is trying to make us hesitate." Danielle finally turned her face slightly. "Officer Keller, what exactly do you believe I am doing?" The question made him pause. Only for a second. "We received a report of a woman watching this location for several nights." "That part is true." Monroe looked at her sharply. Keller stepped closer. "So you admit it?" "I said the observation is accurate. I did not say your conclusion is." His expression hardened again. "You think this is a game?" "No," Danielle's voice became quieter. "That is why I am asking you to verify before you decide." The street behind them had grown almost empty. The convenience store clerk stood behind the glass, pretending not to watch. A young couple near the gas pumps had stopped talking. A delivery driver sat inside his van with both hands on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the flashing lights. Danielle knew what they saw. A black woman against an SUV. 2 white officers around her. A scene already telling its own story before anyone knew the facts. Keller reached for his radio again. "Dispatch, any warrants on Danielle Brooks?" A pause. Keys clicking faintly in the background. "Negative." "Any criminal history?" Another pause. "Negative." Monroe looked at Keller. Keller looked at Danielle. Nothing changed. That was when she understood the real problem. He was not gathering information to learn who she was. He was gathering information until something appeared that would justify what he had already decided. Danielle drew one slow breath. "Officer Monroe," she said, keeping her eyes forward, "you have noticed the same thing I have." Monroe hesitated. "What is that?" "Every answer you get points away from danger." Keller cut in. "Do not tell my partner how to do his job." Danielle let the silence sit between them. Then Monroe's radio crackled with a new voice, deeper and more authoritative. "Unit 12, this is Lieutenant Perez. I am seeing a federal restriction flag on your stop. Give me your exact location." Keller's expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Not yet. Something smaller. Uncertainty. Danielle saw it in the glass before he could hide it. She also saw something else. Half a block away, reflected in the same window, a dark sedan had stopped at the corner. Hawthorne had not left. He had circled back. And now he was watching everything. Lieutenant Perez's voice came through the radio again, calm but firmer this time. "Unit 12, confirm your location." Keller reached for the microphone clipped near his shoulder. "Jefferson and 9th, outside the Quick Mart." Danielle's eyes stayed on the reflection in the SUV window. The dark sedan remained at the corner, engine running, headlights dimmed. Hawthorne had circled back because curiosity had overcome caution. That meant she still had a chance, but only if the scene stopped growing. "Copy," Perez replied. "Hold position. Do not escalate. I am en route." Monroe looked at Keller. "We should wait." Keller's face tightened. "We are not standing around because a database threw a flag." Danielle turned her head just enough to see him. "That flag exists for a reason. And you still will not tell me what that reason is." "Not where everyone can hear it." Keller looked around at the convenience store windows, the people near the gas pumps, the delivery van parked beside the curb. "You think you are in charge of this scene?" "No," Danielle said. "I think you are responsible for it." The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they stopped him for a beat. Monroe glanced away. Keller did not. "Turn around fully," he ordered. Danielle complied. The sedan at the corner vanished from her direct view. Her pulse climbed. "Officer Keller, before you continue, I am asking you one last time to let me speak privately with your supervisor. You can talk when he gets here. By then, the person you should actually be concerned about may be gone." Keller's eyes narrowed. What person? Danielle said nothing. The answer itself was dangerous. Keller stepped closer. What person? I cannot identify him publicly. Then stop making claims you will not explain. Danielle felt frustration rising like heat beneath her ribs. She forced it back down. Discipline first. Always discipline first. Officer Monroe, she said, please note the time. Monroe looked at his watch without thinking. 8:43. Thank you. Keller stared at her. Why are you documenting this? Because details matter. You planning to file a complaint? I am planning to remember what happened. That answer unsettled him more than anger would have. Keller moved toward the front of the SUV. Step away from the vehicle. Danielle did. Hands where I can see them. She raised them again. Monroe watched her carefully, then looked toward Keller. Ryan, she has no record. The vehicle is federally restricted. Lieutenant Perez told us to hold. And she keeps talking about an unknown person in the area while refusing to explain who he is. That could be exactly why we were told to hold. Keller shook his head. Or it could be a distraction. Danielle noticed something in the edge of her vision. The dark sedan had moved again. It rolled slowly past the far end of the block, less than 100 yards away now. Hawthorne was not simply watching anymore. He was testing the scene. Seeing whether anyone noticed him. Danielle's voice changed. Officer Monroe. He looked at her. Do not turn your head. Monroe froze. Keller gave a short, irritated laugh. Now you are giving tactical instructions. Danielle ignored him. There is a dark sedan approaching from the east. Do not look directly at it. Monroe's eyes moved without his head turning. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. He had seen it. Keller had not. Why? Monroe asked. Because if the driver realizes you noticed him, he leaves. Keller finally glanced toward the intersection. Danielle closed her eyes for half a second. Too late. The sedan accelerated smoothly through the light. Great, she whispered. Keller looked back at her. What? Danielle lowered her voice. You just told him this scene matters. The radio crackled again. Lieutenant Perez sounded closer now. Unit 12, I am 2 minutes out. Keller answered, but Danielle barely heard him. Her focus stayed on the taillights shrinking into the rain. She had protected her identity, but the perimeter was unraveling. Monroe took one cautious step nearer. Who was that driver? Danielle looked at him. Someone your lieutenant needs to hear about before anyone else does. Keller folded his arms. You expect us to trust you? Danielle met his eyes for the first time without looking away. No. I expect you to verify me. A new set of headlights turned onto Jefferson. An unmarked police sedan approached fast enough to matter, then slowed beside the cruisers. Lieutenant Elena Perez stepped out before the engine had fully gone quiet. She took in the scene in one sweep, Danielle standing in the rain, Keller rigid beside the patrol car, Monroe uneasy near the SUV, civilians watching from behind glass. Perez walked straight toward them. Nobody moves, she said. Then her eyes landed on Danielle, and the professional calm on her face changed. Ms. Brooks, she said carefully. Keller looked from Perez to Danielle. You know her. Perez did not answer him. Instead, she lowered her voice. Why are my officers standing in the middle of your operation? Lieutenant Perez did not raise her voice, but the question changed the air around them. Keller looked at Danielle, then back at Perez. Operation, he asked. Perez ignored him. Danielle kept her hands visible and answered carefully. I was conducting surveillance. Your officers stopped me before I could reposition. Monroe's face tightened. Keller stared at her. Surveillance on who? Perez turned toward him. You were told to hold. I was trying to establish what was happening. By continuing after a federal restriction. Flag. Keller's jaw set. She would not identify herself. Danielle finally lowered her hands a few inches. I identified myself by name. I told you my credentials were in my left pocket. You refused to let me reach for them. Keller looked toward the pocket as if seeing it for the first time. Perez stepped between them. Nobody reaches for anything yet. Rain drummed against the hoods of the parked cars. The convenience store sign buzzed overhead. Monroe glanced toward the intersection where Hawthorne's sedan had disappeared. Lieutenant, there was another vehicle. Perez looked at him. What vehicle? Monroe hesitated, then nodded toward Danielle. She warned us about a dark sedan coming from the east. I saw it. Keller looked directly at it, and it left. Keller turned sharply. I looked because she was giving us instructions without explaining why. Danielle's voice stayed calm. The driver was my target. Silence. Not dramatic silence. The heavier kind, the kind that came when everyone finally understood that the mistake had consequences beyond the people standing in the rain. Perez looked at Danielle. Did he make you? I do not know yet. How long have you been on him? 6 months. Monroe closed his eyes for a second. Keller said nothing. Perez reached for her radio. Dispatch, lock down all body camera footage from Unit 12 beginning 20 minutes before this stop. Mark it restricted pending supervisory review. Keller looked at her. Lieutenant, is that necessary? Perez met his eyes. Yes. Danielle noticed the first crack in his certainty. It was small, but it was there. Not regret yet. Awareness. He had spent the last several minutes treating every piece of information as another reason to distrust her. Now, for the first time, information was beginning to move in the opposite direction faster than he could explain it away. Perez turned back to Danielle. Can we verify your credentials privately? Yes. How? Danielle looked at Keller. He can remove the wallet from my left jacket pocket without opening anything else. Perez nodded once. Monroe, you do it. Monroe stepped forward slowly. Ma'am, I am going to reach toward your left side. Understood. He carefully removed a slim black credential wallet and handed it to Perez. Keller watched every movement. Perez opened it. Her expression became unreadable. She looked at the identification, then at Danielle, then at Keller. Special Agent Danielle Brooks, she said quietly. Monroe looked down at the wet pavement. Keller remained still. Danielle felt no satisfaction. None. The sedan was gone. The surveillance route was compromised. Hawthorne could be calling every contact he had by now. Perez closed the wallet and handed it back to Danielle. Agent Brooks, I apologize for the disruption. Danielle took it. We can deal with that later. Keller finally found his voice. Lieutenant, we had a report. A black female near a dark vehicle, possibly armed. Danielle turned toward him slowly. And when everything you checked contradicted danger, you kept searching for a reason to believe danger anyway. Keller opened his mouth, then stopped. Monroe looked at him. Perez looked at him. The words had nowhere to hide. Danielle slipped the credential wallet back into her pocket. I need to contact my team. Perez nodded. Do it. Danielle reached for her phone, then paused when another set of lights appeared at the far end of Jefferson. Not patrol lights. A black government SUV moving fast through the rain. It pulled in behind Perez's sedan and stopped. The rear door opened. A tall man in a dark overcoat stepped out, followed by 2 agents. Keller looked confused. Perez did not. Danielle recognized the men immediately. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Marcus Reed crossed the parking lot with measured steps, his eyes moving from Danielle to the officers, then to the empty intersection. Tell me he did not get away, he said. Danielle looked toward where Hawthorne had vanished. He did. Reed's expression hardened. Then he turned toward Keller. And somebody is going to explain exactly why. Marcus Reed stopped beneath the convenience store awning, rain sliding from the shoulders of his overcoat as he studied the scene without speaking. Danielle knew that silence. He used it when anger would waste time. Start with the target, he said. Danielle glanced toward Jefferson Avenue. Victor Hawthorne was across the street when the stop began. Gray jacket, dark sedan, He left, circled back, watched the officers question me, then drove east after Officer Keller looked directly at his vehicle. Reed turned to one of the agents beside him. Notify the surveillance teams. Assume Hawthorne changes vehicles and cancels tonight's meeting. Pull traffic cameras within a 3-mile radius. The agent moved toward the government SUV, already making the call. Keller shifted beside his cruiser. We did not know there was an operation. Reed looked at him. That is exactly why procedures exist. Keller's face tightened. We had a suspicious person report. And then you had a restricted federal vehicle, Reed replied. No warrants. No criminal history. A request for a supervisor. At what point did the facts begin to matter? Keller said nothing. Danielle watched rain gather on the edge of her credential wallet before she slipped it deeper into her coat. The night had become strangely quiet. No shouting now. No urgent commands. Only the soft hiss of passing tires and the steady tapping of water against metal. The same street looked different when nobody was trying to control it. Lieutenant Perez stepped closer to Reed. I have already ordered preservation of the body camera recordings. Good. Reed looked toward Monroe. Officer, did you see Hawthorne's sedan? Monroe nodded. Yes, sir. Did Agent Brooks warn you before Keller looked at it? Monroe hesitated. Yes. Keller turned toward him. Monroe did not look away this time. She told me not to turn my head. I saw the vehicle in my peripheral vision. She was trying to keep the driver from realizing we noticed him. Reed gave a slow nod. That matters. Danielle looked at Monroe. He seemed smaller somehow, not because anyone had humiliated him, but because he had finally understood the weight of doing nothing while someone else kept making the wrong choice. Keller crossed his arms. So what happens now? Reed answered without emotion. Now we recover the investigation. I meant with us. Perez looked at Keller. That will be reviewed separately. Keller's eyes moved to Danielle. I was doing my job. Danielle held his gaze. She could have answered quickly. She could have listed every moment when he ignored information, every chance he had been given to slow down, every assumption he had protected. Instead, she looked at the rain running down the windshield of her SUV. Doing the job is not the same as doing it well, she said. Keller looked away. Reed checked his phone. Hawthorne's vehicle was caught on a traffic camera 2 blocks east. He turned south on Madison. Danielle's attention sharpened. Any sign of a switch? Not yet. Then we still have a window. Reed nodded. Maybe. Danielle looked toward her SUV. The passenger window reflected the flashing patrol lights, but their colors had softened in the rain. For the first time since the stop began, her breathing slowed. She was no longer trapped between protecting her identity and protecting the case. The truth was finally in the open. Yet it did not feel like victory. 6 months of quiet work had been exposed in minutes, and Hawthorne now knew enough to become careful. Perez handed Danielle her coffee cup from the roof of the SUV. The cardboard had gone soft from the rain. Danielle looked at it, then gave the smallest tired smile. Cold? Perez asked. Very. It was the first ordinary question anyone had asked her all night. Danielle took the cup anyway. Across the parking lot, Keller stood beside his cruiser beneath the pulsing lights, staring at nothing. Monroe quietly removed his hat and let the rain touch his face. Nobody spoke. And in that brief stillness, with water running along the curb and sirens silent at last, Danielle understood that the hardest part was still ahead. Hawthorne had escaped the block, but the larger truth had nowhere left to hide. The call from the traffic team came less than a minute later, and Marcus Reed answered on speaker. We found Hawthorne's sedan on Madison, the agent said. Empty. Driver door unlocked. No sign of him. Danielle closed her eyes briefly. That was exactly what she had expected. Hawthorne never trusted one escape route. Check parking structures within 4 blocks, she said. He keeps secondary vehicles near meeting sites. Reed looked at her. You are sure? He did it twice during surveillance. Different cars, same pattern. Lieutenant Perez listened closely. Keller stood several feet away, rain dripping from the edge of his uniform cap. For the first time all night, he was not interrupting. Another voice came through the phone. "Stand by. We have a traffic camera at Madison and 14th. A pause followed. Keyboard clicks. Static. Then the agent returned. Black sedan entered the Northbridge garage. A silver pickup exited 90 seconds later. Danielle looked at Reed. "That is him." Reed immediately started issuing instructions. "Send the East team. Quiet approach. No marked units." Keller shifted uncomfortably at those last words. Danielle noticed, but said nothing. The operation was moving again. That mattered more than winning an argument in a parking lot. Perez stepped toward her. "Agent Brooks, there is something else you should know." Danielle turned. "What?" Perez glanced toward Keller and Monroe. The original call did not come from a store employee. Danielle's expression changed. "Who called?" Perez checked the information on her mobile terminal. Anonymous prepaid number. Caller specifically described a black woman beside a dark sport utility vehicle and said she might be armed. Danielle felt the entire night rearrange itself in her mind. She looked toward the corner where Hawthorne had first been standing. What time was the call placed? 8:31. Danielle immediately checked her watch. The cruisers arrived at 8:34. Reed understood first. Hawthorne made the call. Monroe stared at him. Keller's face went still. Danielle spoke slowly, assembling the pieces. "He saw me before I realized it. He could not confirm who I was, so he created a disturbance and watched how I reacted." Perez looked toward the empty street. "He used local police to test you." "Yes." Danielle's voice was quiet now. "If I showed credentials, he learned I was law enforcement. If I ran, he learned I was afraid of being identified. If the officers detained me long enough, he got time to leave." Reed's phone rang again. He answered. The East team had located the silver pickup. Moving toward Interstate 84. Hawthorne was still under observation. Reed gave instructions to maintain distance and ended the call. "We have him again." Danielle exhaled for what felt like the first time in several minutes. Keller looked at her. "So he manipulated us." Danielle met his eyes. "He gave you a description. You decided what that description meant." The distinction landed heavily. Keller looked down at the pavement. "I thought I was responding to a threat." "You were responding to a possibility," Danielle said. "The problem came when every fact after that stopped mattering." Monroe removed his cap, rubbing rainwater from the brim. "I saw the warning signs," he admitted. Keller looked at him. Monroe continued. "The vehicle flag. No record. Her asking for a supervisor. I saw all of it." "Then why did you not say more?" Perez asked. Monroe stared at the ground. "Because Keller sounded certain." Danielle's expression softened, but only slightly. "Certainty is not evidence." Nobody answered. Reed checked his phone once more, then looked toward Danielle. "Chief Whitman is on his way." Perez notified him when the federal restriction came back. Keller's head lifted. "The chief?" Perez nodded. "He wants the full account personally." Headlights appeared at the end of Jefferson moments later. A dark command vehicle turned into the lot and stopped beside the patrol cars. Police Chief Harold Whitman stepped out into the rain, buttoning his coat as he approached. His eyes moved across the scene, settling first on Perez, then Reed, then Danielle. He stopped walking. Recognition crossed his face immediately. 3 days earlier, he had sat across from Danielle in a closed federal briefing room while she explained the Hawthorne investigation to senior leadership. Whitman looked at Keller. Then Monroe. Then back at Danielle. "Special Agent Brooks," he said. Keller's face lost what little color remained. Whitman's voice became quieter. "Someone tell me why the lead federal agent I personally authorized to operate in this district was treated like a suspect on her own surveillance detail." The rain kept falling. This time, no one mistook the silence for Uncertainty. Chief Whitman did not wait for anyone to defend themselves. His eyes stayed on Keller long enough to make the silence uncomfortable, then shifted to Monroe, Perez, Reed, and finally Danielle. "I want facts," he said. "Not explanations shaped after the fact." Perez gave him the sequence in order. The anonymous call. The restricted vehicle flag. Danielle's repeated request for a supervisor. The warning about the dark sedan. The surveillance target circling the block. The possibility that Hawthorne had used the officers to test whether Danielle was law enforcement. Whitman listened without interruption. By the time Perez finished, his expression had hardened. Keller tried once. "Chief, the caller said she might be armed." Whitman turned toward him. "And what did your own checks tell you after that?" Keller hesitated. "No warrants." "What else?" "No criminal history." "What else?" Keller looked toward the SUV. "Restricted federal registration." Whitman nodded once. "And what did Agent Brooks ask for?" Keller's voice dropped. "A supervisor." Repeatedly. Perez answered for him. "Yes." Whitman took a slow breath. Rain tapped against the shoulders of his coat. "Then this is not about one bad moment. This is about every opportunity you had to reassess the situation and chose not to." Keller's face tightened. "I was trying to keep control." Danielle spoke before Whitman could answer. "Control is not the same as accuracy." Everyone looked at her. She had not raised her voice. That made the sentence land harder. Whitman turned slightly. "Agent Brooks, what do you want documented?" Danielle looked at Keller, then Monroe. "Everything." Keller frowned. Danielle continued. "Preserve every body camera recording. Preserve dispatch audio. Preserve the anonymous call. Preserve the vehicle query. Preserve timestamps from Lieutenant Perez's instructions. I want the record to show every point where new information became available." Whitman nodded. "Done. And I want Officer Monroe's statement taken separately." Monroe looked surprised. "Why mine?" "Because you saw the contradictions." Danielle's tone was not cruel. "You noticed them before anyone else said them out loud." Monroe lowered his eyes. "I should have spoken sooner." "Yes," Danielle said. "You should have." The answer was simple, without anger. Monroe nodded slowly. Keller looked at Danielle again. "What happens to me?" Danielle studied him for a moment. He seemed to expect punishment from her personally, as if authority had simply changed hands and now she could use it the way he had. She did not. "That is not my decision." Whitman stepped in. "Pending review, you are relieved from field duty effective immediately." Keller looked at him. "Chief. Your equipment will be secured. Internal affairs will handle the rest." Keller's shoulders dropped slightly. The confidence that had filled him earlier was gone. He looked at Danielle. "I did not know who you were." Danielle's expression changed, not with satisfaction, but disappointment. "That should not have been the requirement." Keller said nothing. She continued. "You did not need to know I was a federal agent to listen when the facts changed." Whitman looked away for a second, as if the sentence had reached beyond Keller. Reed checked his phone and stepped closer to Danielle. "Hawthorne is still moving west. The team has him at a safe distance." Danielle nodded. "Good." Reed lowered his voice. "We may still recover the meeting." Danielle looked toward the wet intersection. "Then we focus on that." Whitman seemed surprised. "You want to go back to work tonight?" Danielle looked at him. The investigation did not stop because this happened. Keller stared at her. Perhaps that was the moment he expected anger. Perhaps revenge would have made more sense to him. Instead, Danielle adjusted the collar of her coat and checked the time. "But the review should happen whether we catch Hawthorne tonight or not." Whitman nodded. "It will." Danielle started toward Reed's government SUV, then stopped beside Keller. He did not look at her at first. "Agent Brooks," he said quietly, "I am sorry." Danielle waited. The rain filled the space between them. Keller finally met her eyes. I decided what I thought I was seeing before I knew what I was looking at. Danielle held his gaze. Then remember what that cost. She did not offer absolution. She did not humiliate him either. She simply walked away. Behind her, Whitman began giving instructions to Perez. Monroe stood beside the cruiser, preparing to surrender his written account. Keller remained under the flashing lights, alone with the consequences of his certainty. Danielle opened the government SUV door, but before climbing inside, she looked once toward the empty space where she had stood with her hands raised less than half an hour earlier. Nothing about the pavement had changed. The same rain. The same cold light. The same street. Only now, everyone standing there knew how quickly a person could be reduced to an assumption, and how much damage could happen before someone finally chose to see clearly. By midnight, the rain had stopped. Danielle sat in the rear seat of the government SUV with Marcus Reed beside her, watching live updates move across a secure tablet as the surveillance team followed Victor Hawthorne west toward an industrial district near the river. He had changed vehicles twice, abandoned one phone, and altered his route, but he had not canceled the meeting. That surprised her. Men like Hawthorne trusted their own cleverness too much. He thinks he shook us, Reed said. Danielle looked at the map. Then let him keep thinking that. 40 minutes later, the team confirmed Hawthorne had entered a warehouse office used by one of his suspected financial intermediaries. No sirens arrived. No marked units appeared. No public confrontation unfolded. The federal team simply documented the meeting, preserved the evidence, and watched the operation return to its purpose. By sunrise, Danielle was back inside a conference room at the field office, a fresh cup of coffee untouched near her hand. Reed entered carrying a thin folder. "We have enough from last night to move the case forward," he said. Danielle nodded, but her attention stayed on a second document lying beside the folder. The report from Jefferson and 9th. The incident had not disappeared just because the investigation survived. 3 days later, Chief Harold Whitman requested a joint meeting with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Keller had been removed from field duty while Internal Affairs reviewed his decisions. Monroe had given a complete statement, including the moment he realized the facts no longer supported the assumptions guiding the stop. Department leadership ordered a formal review of supervisor escalation procedures, restricted vehicle alerts, and how anonymous threat reports were assessed when race was included in vague descriptions. None of it erased what happened. Danielle did not pretend it did. When she entered the police briefing room that morning, conversations stopped. Keller was not there. Monroe sat near the back of the room, his hands folded in front of him. Whitman stood at the head of the table. He did not introduce Danielle by rank first. "This is Danielle Brooks," he said. "What happened to her should concern us regardless of the credentials she carries." Danielle looked at him. That mattered. Whitman continued. "The lesson is not that officers should be more careful because the person in front of them might be federal law enforcement. The lesson is that every person deserves to have new facts matter." The room stayed quiet. Danielle placed her credential wallet on the table. The gold seal caught the morning light, but she did not touch it again. "A badge can explain my job," she said. "It should never be what proves I deserve to be heard." Monroe lowered his eyes. Several officers around the table looked toward him, then back at Danielle. She did not ask for their guilt. She asked for their attention. Weeks later, Victor Hawthorne was taken into federal custody after investigators completed the case without exposing the remaining undercover team. The operation survived. The review at the police department continued. Keller faced departmental consequences through the formal process, while Monroe returned to duty only after additional training and a documented performance review. Danielle never celebrated any of it. Justice, she had learned, did not always sound like applause. Sometimes it sounded like a room becoming quiet enough for people to examine themselves. On a cool Monday morning, Danielle walked past the same convenience store on Jefferson before heading to another assignment. The pavement was dry now. Cars moved through the intersection. Nobody stopped to look at her. She stood for a moment beside the place where the SUV had been parked and remembered the rain, the flashing lights, the questions that kept coming after the answers should have mattered. Then she continued walking. Kindness did not mean ignoring wrongdoing. Patience did not mean accepting injustice. And strength did not always mean proving someone wrong in the moment. Sometimes strength meant holding onto your dignity long enough to make the truth impossible to dismiss. So if you had been standing on that street that night, watching the facts change while certainty refused to change with them, what would you have done, and at what point would you have spoken up?